Of all the great samurai clans throughout history, few matched their fierceness with also centuries of influential rule. Filled with significant figures who spanned across generations and periods in time which helped to shape the face of the nation. Today, we discuss such a clan, one which was known for some of the mightiest warriors of the Sengoku era, as well as one of the most prominent figures of the Bakumatsu. A clan whose impact continues to this day, and whose legacy has been the spotlight of brilliant films such as 1962's Harakiri. Today, we discuss the story of the Ii. The lineage of the Ii family can be traced back all the way to the Heian period, where they had branched off from the prominent Fujiwara. The founding member of the Ii appears to be a figure known as Ii Tomoyasu, and who lived during the 11th century and hailed from Totomi province. Throughout their existence, there appears to be two kamon, or family crests, we have come to associate with them. These being the Maruni Inoji, more of a cross-hatched symbol which resembles the first kanji character within the Ii name, and that of the Hikone Tachibana, which was meant to represent a mandarin orange. Judging by the name, I would assume the Hikone Tachibana kamon did not come into usage until perhaps after the year 1600, when the Ii were granted land in Omi, where they would later construct Hikone Castle. But returning to the early days of the family, the Ii would soon become one of the more prominent names of Totomi for several centuries. And really, from the late Heian period all the way through the Kamakura period, not much notable seems to have happened to them. That is, until the fall of the Kamakura shogunate in 1333. It was here, during the Kinmu Restoration, that the Ii are believed to have become close supporters of the restored emperor Go-Daigo, even after he was later deposed by Ashikaga Takauji, kickstarting the rise of the Ashikaga shogunate. As we know, Go-Daigo fled south to establish his own rival imperial court in Nara, opposed to the northern court in Kyoto. This initiated the Nanboku-cho era, a turbulent time in which supporters of the northern court and the southern court battled across Japan. And this is where things for the Ii really start to get interesting. The Ii, of course, remained pretty loyal to the southern court, whom the Emperor Go-Daigo had established, and thus they would come into conflict with hostile neighbors who instead supported the north, namely the mighty Imagawa family of Suruga to the east. The two families would compete for a time. However, there was no way that the Ii could ever hope to truly rival the power of the Imagawa, and thus, by the onset of the Sengoku period, the Ii would eventually fall under the full influence of the Imagawa. This had the effect of expanding the borders of the Imagawa realm deeper into Totomi, along the prominent Tokaido Road, while also continuing to grow their might as one of the true dominant forces within the region. And while the Imagawa did benefit greatly from having the Ii under their thumb, one cannot say that this relationship between their houses was necessarily secure. The Ii were an ambitious family who had not forgotten their prideful days before falling under the Imagawa banner, and thus this relationship between the two has been categorized as a tense one. By the early 1500s, we enter into the years when Ii Naomori led the family. A stalwart commander for the Imagawa, Naomori was present during significant clashes between the Imagawa and their hostile neighbors to the west, namely the Oda, whom daimyo Imagawa Yoshimoto would march in mass against in the year 1560. As we know, this would then result in the Great Battle of Okehizama, in which not only Yoshimoto was slain, but also Naomori as well. This threw both clans into chaos as new leaders scrambled to take their place and control the damages of this major upset. The Imagawa would even lose their grip over Mikawa as the prominent Matsudaira family would wrestle their way free after the disaster in Owari. If the Ii had been in a more stable place, perhaps they too could have quickly followed suit as well. However, with the death of Naomori, the position of the clan was left uncertain. What ended up happening was that Naomori's cousin, Naochika, would eventually take leadership of the family. Yet, it would quickly be seen that even Naochika was not a desirable candidate for leadership, as he would increasingly be at odds with the new head of the Imagawa, Ujizane. It is believed that perhaps Naochika did plan to rebel against the Imagawa as well after all, yet the plot was soon enough discovered, and in 1562, Naochika was killed on the order of Ujizane. This effectively left no male heirs of age left within the Ii family to assume control. However, the family itself would not collapse. Naomori, who had died at Okehizama, also had a daughter. For some time now she had been living a religious life and had taken the name Jirohoshi. However, now that the Ii clan was in need of a new leader, she would step forth and, in time, come to assume the name Naotora. Despite the fact that the Ii were facing a time of great crisis, with their prominent leading figures having been killed, accompanied by a loss of land as well, Naotora still managed to hold the situation together and has gone on to become one of the most well-known female leaders within pre-modern Japan, as she kept the Ii secure and would even adopt the son of Naochika. This was a young boy by the name of Toramatsu, whom she would keep hidden while she raised him. One day, he would come to be known as none other than Ii Naomasa. By the mid to late 1560s, it was obvious that the Imagawa were in decline, and thus Naotora began to consider switching allegiances to another more powerful clan. The clear choice would eventually present itself within the Matsudaira to the west, who would also soon come to be known as the Tokugawa. In 1568, Tokugawa Ieyasu had made an arrangement with the mighty daimyo of Kai, Takeda Shingen, to both split the lands of the weak Imagawa. Thus a dual invasion began as Shingen moved to seize Suruga and Ieyasu went to secure Totomi. It's really following this event that we can see the Ii fully come under the influence of the Tokugawa, as the young Naomasa would even be sent off to serve Ieyasu. It is believed that Naomasa became a page for Ieyasu, and that the two might have engaged in an intimate relationship, something which was not uncommon among samurai and their pages during this time. For certain though, the upbringing of the young Naomasa was fairly interesting, having been imbued with the skillful nature of his adoptive mother Naotora, and now learning firsthand from the man who had become one of the Sengoku period's greatest leaders. Naomasa matured into a sharp-witted and talented figure himself. Finally, we arrive at 1582, which ends up being one of the most important years in Naomasa's life. It is the year that, sadly, Naotora passed away, but also that Naomasa fully comes of age and is wed to one of Ieyasu's adopted daughters. However, this is also the chaotic year in which not only the Takeda were wiped out by the armies of the Oda and Tokugawa, but also that Oda Nobunaga would be slain, creating a power vacuum in central Japan. Naomasa is seen here to show his skills as a tactful diplomat, negotiating with many of the former Takeda vassals and winning them over to join with the Tokugawa. For this, Naomasa would be rewarded by Ieyasu with an increase in income for his landholdings. Also coming into his own as a warrior, Naomasa was quick to distinguish himself in battle, and soon enough he was rising through the ranks of the Tokugawa leadership, fighting alongside many other notable Tokugawa commanders such as Honda Tadakatsu, Sakakibara Yasumasa, and Sakai Tadatsugu. By 1584, Naomasa had become a respected commander and leader of what would become one of the finest samurai corps in the entire country, the Akazone, or the Red Devils, a group of fearsome warriors under the Ii banner, clad in blazing red armor, and always following the charge of Naomasa. Stories say that Naomasa may have chosen the red armor of his unit specifically to honor the famed Takeda general Yamagata Masakage, who too had a tradition of red armor. Red armor not only served as a symbol of ferocity, making it perhaps also an intimidation factor, but also it was chosen because it stood out very well, not only making his warriors distinguishable on the battlefield, but also memorable by their enemies. The Red Devils would see some of their earliest service at the Battle of Komaki Nagakute in that same year, when Tokugawa Ieyasu faced off in an epic clash against the rising power of Hashiba Hideyoshi. It was here his prowess was on display for all, as his unit won the great achievement of slaying the famed enemy general Ikeda Tsuneoki during the heated clash at Nagakute. 6 years later, he and his Red Devils would also bring further fame to themselves during one of the intense moments of fighting at the otherwise unorthodox Siege of Odawara, as he is believed to have been the only commander to have breached the castle's walls. Yet perhaps his most legendary moment was at the Great Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, when he decided to disobey orders and charge the enemy line ahead of Fukushima Masanori, who had been designated as the vanguard. And his ferocity would not end there, as later, once the battle was nearly won, he pushed on to destroy the Shimazu contingent. However, As he smashed his way through their ranks, it was here Naomasa would be shot by a Shimazu gunner. This hit took him out of the battle, but it did not immediately kill him, at least not yet. Following the battle, with his lord Ieyasu the Great victor and essentially in control of the entire country, Naomasa and the Ii were to enjoy prominent status for their loyalty under the Tokugawa banner. The Ii would be granted the area around Sawayama Castle in Omi province, the same place that his former enemy from Sekigahara, Ishida Mitsunari, had once ruled over. Yet sadly, he would not have long to enjoy the new peace that had been established, as he would die shortly after in 1602, from what many believe to be the result of the bullet wound he suffered at Sekigahara. Naomasa was succeeded by his son, Ii Naomasa, who would later complete the construction of the new Hikone Castle in Omi, from which the Ii would rule their domain. The construction of a mighty new castle during the Edo period was somewhat of a rarity, as the shogunate was more focused on actually removing powerful fortifications across the country than building them. Even more rare was the fact that the new Bakufu ordered other domains to be the ones to actually construct Hikone for the Ii. Yet the purpose of Hikone was one seen as extremely significant, as it was meant to safeguard Kyoto and Osaka. Naokatsu, however, had struggles with his health, and thus was unable to later serve during the sieges of Osaka in 1614 and 1615, instead sending his younger brother Naotaka. Naotaka and the Red Devils would see some of the thickest fighting during the Osaka conflict, and following the end of the siege would shortly after go on to take over leadership of the clan from his sickly brother. The Ii would press on into the Edo period as one of the most prominent of the Fudai, inner lord, daimyo clans within the new Tokugawa regime, seen as one of the most significant cogs in the greater structure of the Edo Bakufu. And it is here that I think it is really important to also just mention their fictional appearance in one of the greatest samurai films and critiques of Edo period society, Harakiri. It is in this film that the Ii are portrayed, rightfully so, as a significant power within the Tokugawa government. However, being now into the 1630s, with the age of war having passed, the Ii have tried desperately to cling to their outdated valiant warrior identity, the same nature once characterized by their famed red armor. It is this facade that is torn down by a lone veteran samurai of the Sengoku period, whose quest for revenge leads him down a path of exposing the hypocrisy of the Ii and the unsavory nature of what the samurai have become in the new age of peace. I highly recommend that you watch this film. It is seriously a masterpiece. I've also made a whole video on it if you want to check that out too. But what this film of course does is indeed showcase the changing nature of the samurai into the Edo period, as many try desperately to cling to outdated warrior ways despite the samurai's changing identity as bureaucrats and administrators. The fearsome Ii would not be exempt from this. Eventually, we reach the Bakumatsu era, where we find one of the most significant members within the government to be Ii Naosuke. After the arrival of U.S. Commodore Matthew Perry in 1853, Ii Naosuke, much to the displeasure of many daimyo, would authorize the signing of the Treaty of Amity and Commerce, opening much of Japan's ports to the outside world. At a time when anti-shogunate sentiment was already rising, and with Ii Naosuke's opposition to the imperial cause, he was made into a prime target. In 1860, he would be assassinated by samurai from Mito and Satsuma right in front of the Edo castle gates, while he was on his way to meet with the shogun. Later, during the Boshin War, the Ii would initially support the shogunate, but would quickly realize the changing tide of things and would transition to support the imperial cause. For this, they would be rewarded by the new government. Into the Meiji era, the Ii would become part of the new imperial Japanese aristocracy, known as the Kazoku, and by 1944, with Hikone Castle having long since been considered of any real strategic significance, the Ii family would gift the castle over to Hikone City, who still own and operate it. And to this day, the Ii still live on. The story of the Ii is a long and illustrious one, having risen out of Totomi and nearly being dissolved in the aftermath of the disastrous defeat of their Imagawa overlord at Okehazama. The Ii would still endure, and fate would even see fit to grant them a second chance for glory under the rule of the Tokugawa, one which their famed leader, Ii Naomasa, would rightfully claim, leading the family and the Red Devils into legend. As always, this was just an overview of the story of the Ii, not an overly in-depth analysis of them and their many leaders. But if you would like a say in which clan I should cover next in my clan history videos, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon, where you can suggest and vote for which clan I cover next. And with that said, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most informative.